think all those girls, you know, there was Gladys and Agnes and Mother and Esther. Four girls, and then was Art and Raymond, the two boys. I did not know anything about that farm. I never was there. When I got to remembering my mother's parents, they were already living in town and had a very small house. They were very poor. My grandpa was, he played the violin. I remember that as a positive thing. He smoked all the time. And my grandma, we never communicated because she couldn't hear me, and she only spoke Norwegian. And I think that was part of her dementia, that she went back to her, and I think maybe she always only spoke Norwegian. I don't know the answer to that, but I couldn't understand her, and my mother spoke Norwegian to her, of course, and had to speak really loud because she couldn't hear. And so it was not, I never really got to know them or cared about them, and they weren't affectionate, they weren't warm, they weren't like the other side of the family were much more warm and affectionate and caring. I think her sisters were warm. I was especially close to Esther because we did more things with Esther and Ernest, and they had one daughter, Elaine. And Elaine and my brother Jim were very close as far as age, and they got to be good friends. So we did get together and do some things as cousins, but I never felt close to any of them really, except Elaine. She didn't talk much about growing up that I remember. She just, I knew that it was hard for them. They had to raise their own food, and that she went out and worked, you know, in someone else's house to earn money. I think she finished her 8th grade, and Dad finished 6th grade.
I remember Grandma telling me about being sent away from home,
to
and
work.
going to work hard
Yeah, they had
for
hard.
people that she didn't know.
Yeah.
And
Washing clothes was extremely hard because they had to do it all by hand. And they had to get up early in the morning and have their clothes out on the line very early. And there was just, it was tough. They had to work hard. And then the biggest trauma in my mother's life was the way she lost all of her family. I mean, first of all, her mother having dementia as she did, they had to take care of her, and so they moved her around to each household like they did on my dad's side, but she was pretty impossible to take care of. And I don't remember how long before that my grandpa died. I really don't remember much about him, except that I remember their anniversary party at our house where he danced with my grandma. Yeah, he played the violin, and he, you know, I don't know, I thought it was pretty decent music, and he was excited to play, and so that's really the major good part I can remember of him. But the rest of the family, I remember specifically Raymond, who he was the youngest, and he was the one in the war. He went to World War II, and like I say, spent 5 years in North Africa. He did not get to meet his oldest son until his boy was 5 years old. But Arthur died, got a high fever, and his temperature was like 106, and they put him on an ice bed of ice, trying to get his temp down. And my mother tells about going in to see him when he was dying, and his whole body shook, and it was just a devastating situation, and he ultimately died. I don't even know what it was he had. I don't know if they did. She accidentally burned herself, and what she was doing was she was in the kitchen ironing, and she had filled a bottle of, we used to use a kind of cleaner that you put on your clothes to clean off the spots, and it was called spot remover actually, and she had filled that up with kerosene or gasoline, kerosene I think, And what happened, they think, is that she tipped it over, and it hit the iron and exploded. And she was burned, all of her body down to, she had a skirt on, and she was burned to where the skirt came at her ankles, and her whole body was burned. And there was a little spot on her back that wasn't burned, but otherwise she was black, burned black. She lived for a couple days, I don't know, some hours, long enough for my mother and for the other sisters and other people to go in and see her before she died. And it was such an experience that my mother really, I don't think, ever got over it. But she saw Gladys black and unable to speak and dying. Can you imagine? So anyway, she died, and not before that, but after that, her sister Agnes was married to a guy by the name of Sandy something, and they've been married many years. They fought a lot. I mean, he was a heavy drinker too, and anyway, they were walking down the steps together, and she fell and hit her head and had a concussion, and ultimately what do you call those, blood clot, yeah, and died. And my mother and dad talked about it very quietly. So that was another traumatic thing.
So she talked to me about all these things, and
Yeah.
you could tell it really had an impact on her.
I'm sure it was, a lot of it was happening during the time that I was in high school, and my mother was taking some kind of medicine for depression, I know. And so the things that happened, my mom and I, did a lot of, I don't know, I just didn't like my mother very much when I was in high school. And I think, as I look back, I imagine a lot of it had to do with the fact that she was in a state of depression, as well as trying to get through. I think my dad, he'd get drunk. I mean, she had a lot of things to deal with that they hardly ever talked about with us kids, but that as you look back, I think really my mother had a lot of problems. And after my dad died, my mother really became her own self. I mean, she became Minnie. She was a great person.